Great, Cohen. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. This is awesome, and it feels like a long time coming. Even though I know you were probably the first listener to reach out for the Slycast, so it's cool
Really?
that you're
As your
you've
first
suited up.
stalker.
That you've suited up and joined the network. The network's been a lot of fun. There's a show for everyone.
Well, there is now. Now we have a Mel podcast.
Yes.
Yes, the show for intellectuals.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Craig, the podfather, the master of us all. I've taken a little dive. I haven't researched Lethal Weapon at all. I had to research your CV. Well, everybody knows you produced the Slycast. Most of us know you produce Conversations at Jackrabbit Slim's,
Yeah.
which is your show about Tarantino. Love that show, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
People might not know you had a podcast called Big Screen Book Club. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Big Screen Book Club was one of my favorite concepts, but very, very time consuming. And as we all know, I'm not big on things that take a lot of time. But Big Screen Book Club is basically every episode I would take a movie that everybody knows and loves and then read the book or the short story that was associated with that movie and then bring on a special guest who's also watched and read the movie and have a discussion about it. And some of my favorite podcasting moments have happened on that show. I'm especially proud of episode 1, Die Hard, which people may or may not know is based on a novel called Nothing Lasts Forever. And there's a huge history behind that. Nothing Lasts Forever was a sequel to a novel called The Detective. Some movie buffs might remember a Sinatra movie from the 60s called The Detective, same book. We get into all of that on the podcast. Done a bunch of author interviews as well, which is always cool. Most recently, I spoke with Haywood Gould, who wrote the novel Cocktail, which became the pretty bad Tom Cruise movie.
Aha.
So yeah, I don't do a lot of episodes of that anymore, but there is quite a few. And I know on the Last of the Action Heroes network feed, I posted the Die Hard 1 and 2 episodes, as well as I believe the They Live episode I did with Sean Malloy from the Dolph Lundgren podcast.
Yes, I definitely remember that one because I'm a big John Carpenter buff. So there was no book on Lethal Weapon then, huh?
No, I think probably
just the Shane Black script.
Yeah, and you know what? I wonder. I know like the 80s were big on the novelizations. I don't know what it was like on your side of the world.
Oh, same.
Yeah, but those were, I think, and somebody explained it to me. I think it was, not to name drop here, I believe it was David Morrell when I talked to him for the anniversary of First Blood Part 2 a couple of years back. And he talked about writing the novelizations of Part 2 and 3.
Right.
And we kind of went down the road where I asked why they don't do novelizations anymore. And he basically explained that it's because of the sort of explosion of the home video market, that prior to home video, you'd see the movie in the theater and then that would be it. So in order to sort of get people to keep your movie on their radar would be to read the novelization, and novelizations still come out, but nowhere near as often as they used to. So
only women read and write these days.
Yeah. That's
and they're not much into novelizations of action movies, I suppose. Okay, so that was the Big Screen Book Club. Then there was this Camel Clutch Cinema.
Yeah, that was actually my first foray into podcasting. That predates Slycast, and I did it with a buddy of mine, Guy Hutchinson, who actually does a podcast called Drunk on Disney. And
awesome name.
Yeah, it's a fun show, especially if you're into the theme parks and Disney in general. But the concept behind Camel Clutch Cinema, and I believe we did 80 consecutive weeks, which is amazing. So every episode for 80 weeks in a row, we had new content up for people, which blows my mind now. But the concept behind Camel Clutch Cinema was every week we would talk about a movie that had a wrestler in it or featured pro wrestling. Right. So, for example, our first episode was The Marine with John Cena. We covered No Holds Barred with Hulk Hogan. Like I said, we did over 80 episodes. I believe the last 2 we did might have been Spectre and Guardians of the Galaxy. For the
wrestlers get way too many parts.
Well, especially now, we'd have plenty of material now. I know we got towards the bottom of the barrel as the show wrapped up, but Camel Clutch Cinema was a really, really fun show, and I'm really proud of that. And that, if you Google it, that feed is still active. So
wow.
So So
potentially we could collaborate on Daddy's Home 2. John Cena stars in that one.
If you really wanted to.
One of his better performances, in my opinion.
when you put him in the right role, he's a lot of fun to watch. I'll leave it at that.
Let's put it that way. He's a better actor than he's a wrestler.
Oh, absolutely.
And to round things out, you also did the tricorder transmission, which actually I didn't stalk you for that one, but because I'm a big trekker,
Okay.
that's how I found you guys.
Oh, okay.
Because
Neat, yeah.
I listened to that as a companion show. I just thought I'd rewatch original Star Trek, and I just sort of came across your podcast, and I just sort of started listening. And then I ran into Slycast, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, what's this?
Yeah, worlds colliding. Yeah, so Slycast originally started with myself, Jeff Hewlett, and Jeff Ferry. Tricator Transmissions was, I believe we started that probably just before Slycast. And that was me and Jeff Hewlett. My friend Jeff had been looking to get into podcasting for a while. We both had a love of the original series. And what we did was we offered scene-specific commentary for every original episode of the original series. So if you have the Blu-ray or the DVD or you have it on a streaming service, you know, you listen to us count it down and then you start it up. And there we are talking about the episode. So a lot of times we get into the backstory on the episode, guest stars, directors, writers, favorite scenes, things we didn't like. And then at the end, we would let you know whether or not we thought it was essential viewing. One other cool thing we did is we did a couple of supplemental episodes. I know you said you've been to Vegas. I'm not sure when you were here.
About 99.
Okay. So when you were here, the Star Trek experience over at the Hilton was open. Okay.
I did experience the Star Trek experience, at least the start. Yeah, definitely. I own the sheet. I own a t-shirt, in fact.
Yeah, so I think you were probably there before they opened the Borg 4D invasion. On one of the supplemental episodes, we talked to two people that were on the ground floor of the Star Trek The Experience opening, and they gave a lot of great insight into what it was like to work there, why it was such a special place, and ultimately why everybody knew that one day it was eventually going to close.
It's mystifying to us that the great Craig Cohen doesn't seem to do any research anymore. So, of course, I did some investigating, and I've come up with a possible reason why you're not researching anymore. I think the albums are called Catalina Rush, Piano Electric, and my favorite, 6 Feet Under the Underground. Are those the correct names of your albums?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah.
We have an actual musician in our midst, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. I've been playing guitar since I was 15. So over 30 years at this point, when coronavirus hit. So I was furloughed for about 15 months. And during that time, I realized that I wanted to sort of get back into the music and music making. So I sort of got my setup back together, fell into the world of MIDI composing, which is, you know, being able to use basically any sound texture that you want and create any sound you want. I gave myself, originally with Catalina Rush, it was July of 2020. I said, you know what, I'm going to write and record an album over the course of July. And when July's over, if I'm not done with it, oh well. And I did an all-instrumental concept album called Catalina Rush, which I'm really proud of. And then follow that up in the February with 6 Feet Under the Underground, which is another concept album.
Okay, well, maybe we should just encourage people to go to Spotify, type in your name, and you'll just come across all 3 albums. And
I'm currently working. And I'm currently working on another one right now, which is, being back at work, it's a little difficult to, you know, come home from work and spend time with, you know, the wife and the pups, and then also get time in to write and record music. So, but it's been
pups, ladies and gentlemen, are their dogs.
Yes. Frankie and Frida. Yeah, they're my 2 Yorkies.
Okay. Lethal Weapon. How about that soundtrack, huh?
It doesn't do anything for me anymore.
It doesn't do anything. I re-listened to it today. I hear different things now. I guess because I'm not a despondent teenager anymore. It has that saxophone riff from David Sanborn that basically represents Murtaugh, and it has the guitar blues by Clapton that represents Riggs, and then there's the overarching musical theme by Michael Kamen. I still enjoy the jazziness of it and the blues themes. But it's not like I could just put on that record again and go study but it's okay.
I would agree with you. For me,
the movie very well.
Sax is always really challenging. You know, sometimes sax comes off as corny. It definitely gave the entire Lethal Weapon series a personality. And it's also always exciting when you get like non-soundtrack people doing soundtrack work. Of course, Michael Kamen was a brilliant composer, but you bring Clapton into the mix doing his bluesy stuff, and then Sanborn. It's definitely an essential part of this movie. If you strip it away and just have the orchestral aspect, it's not the Lethal Weapon that a lot of people know and love.
No, especially not the first one, because it needs that saxophone and it needs those couple of blues tones. It just needs it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because the first Lethal Weapon is the good one. And it's also the darkest one of them all.
It's Shane Black.
Because he's just depressing, isn't he?
There's a lot of people that would write Lethal Weapon and then only be known for Lethal Weapon, but then he's gone and done stuff within the last 10 years, or 15 years, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang and The Nice Guys. We won't talk about his Iron Man movie.
No, and I hate him for Predator.
Or his Predators movie.
Him for that.
Yeah. He's overshadowed his Lethal Weapon work with the work he's done since then. And it's pretty remarkable because you don't really hear about guys like Steven D'Souza anymore. There's all those guys in the 80s that were either writing scripts or doing polishes thing. Basically all the guys involved in Lethal Weapon. In Die Hard. But Shane's been able to sort of, he directs now. And like I said, when he misses pretty gloriously. But when he hits, he hits. Kind
of like Stallone.
Yes. Hey, you know what? If every time you swing for the fences, you're not gonna hit a home run. Sometimes you're just gonna do a pop out infield.
Well, to give people perspective, Shane Black can be seen in a movie because he is actually in the original Predator.
Yeah, he's like the nerdy guy with the glasses.
Yes, he's the radio guy, Hawkins, he's like, I think the first guy in the team who gets killed.
I think so. Yeah. I gotta say, Seiko, a lot of those 80s movies hit me the way they do because of how old I was when I saw them. And Lethal Weapon I wanted to talk about was, I wouldn't feel the way I feel about Lethal Weapon if I hadn't seen it when I was 14 years old. If I had seen Lethal Weapon,
why you picked it?
I think so. Yeah. In terms of Mel Gibson, we were aware of The Road Warrior. The Road Warrior was a movie that we would rent all the time just because it was so cool. It was, like a punk rock, apocalyptic nonsense, with, George Miller's a maniac. When you're
watch it, you're talking about the guy who won an Oscar with Happy Feet. That's a versatile man.
And also the Babe, the first Babe movie, I believe.
The first Babe movie?
Yeah.
Not the second Babe movie?
I don't know if
Babe in New York, I think.
But I definitely think some of the reasons that I respond so well to or hold Lethal Weapon in a fond place in my heart is because it hits all the beats you need to hit, for a 14-year-old watching a movie. If I was 30 the first time I saw Lethal Weapon, I would call it out for all the nonsense that we're going to talk about.
True.
It starts with a nude woman. So right there, you've checked the first box.
Well, it's the 80s.
Yes.
It has to have boobs.
Yeah.
That's to have the fun of the 80s is you're always going to get boobs no matter what.
Yeah.
Inevitably. You can tell it's the 90s when there are no more boobs. Like Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
How badly was that scene ripped off, right?
Yeah.
Except for one thing, we don't get the boob shot. It's alluded to in Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
There's plenty of stuff to do with their boobs, but you don't actually see it.
Yeah.
Not even the Playboy, which is disgraceful when you think about it. Forrest Gump really should have been done in the 80s.
Well, I know that was based on a book, and it was definitely written in the 80s.
Zemeckis should have done that instead of Back to the Future 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Obviously.
I won't argue with you there.
Then again, there were no boobs in Back to the Future, so, oh well.
Yeah.
Forlorn idea. However, you were 14 when you saw Lethal Weapon. You were the right age.
Absolutely. And I do want to talk about that opening scene a little bit because in the sort of CGI generation of filmmaking, I think we take a lot of things for granted. We see
that's a person falling off a building.
And also that initial shot where you got the helicopter, sort of going through Los Angeles, and then it circles this building, and then it pushes in on this apartment, and then it goes inside the apartment. Now, nowadays we see that, and that doesn't impress us because we've seen all the Fast and the Furious movies and all the Marvel movies and all the nonsense that goes on there. But
here they steal a shot like that from a major great director like this.
Yeah. And I mean, that opening, I rewound it and watched it again because the artistry of that was amazing. And like you said, you've got a real fall. And then you've also got the camera. You got like a POV shot of the tumble where I guess they just dropped the camera. I mean, I don't know. Like, there's a lot of stuff there. I should go back and listen to the commentary track and see if Donner talks about it. That's another thing I love about watching films from this era is you had to figure out how to do stuff. You couldn't just create it with ones and zeros.
Optical effects were a thing.
Yeah. And that's another thing that I think really helps Lethal Weapon, stand out. I do want to mention that this was the first time I had watched the theatrical cut in a long time because the home video version I had was the director's cut. It was playing here on HBO Max in the States, so I was able to watch the original theatrical cut. It was interesting because, like I said, I was so used to the director's cut, so it was. The
original theatrical cut is a lot faster. I don't think the director's cut really adds anything. It gives you, like most director's cuts, it gives you a little bit more spice. Yeah.
The one thing the director's cut does do good is it establishes that in the theatrical cut, Murtaugh wakes up, it's his birthday, he meets Riggs, and it seems like they have the longest day in the world. And the director's cut actually establishes that what occurs in that first day in the original theatrical cut is actually 2 days in the director's cut. And it's a throwaway line, whereas I think like Mel says, or Riggs
because he had a day off on his birthday.
Oh, is that what it was?
I guess so, because it was his birthday. So if this was supposed to be 2 days, then maybe it was just his day off, and the next day he went into work without the beard.
Well, no, I think it's during the point where he's already teamed with Riggs. And they just compressed it all together because he says, I didn't know it was your birthday yesterday or something to that effect.
Right.
So they had met already. But for me, that's the only detail, because I don't know if you felt it, Seiko, but it feels like that first day is really, really long.
That, and what I found peculiar, and you can't really put Lethal Weapon under a microscope because the plot holes are about the size of moon craters.
Yeah.
This is a movie that's supposed to go fast. You're not supposed to think about it much. You're not supposed to scrutinize anything, but came up in my mind when I was seeing him sitting in the bathtub. It was like, okay, so what time are you supposed to report for work? Because I usually don't have time to chill out in the bathtub, but maybe they're just used to Sergeant Murtaugh late for work.
I don't know.
He doesn't really seem to be happy about anything. So maybe they just let him because he's in a better mood after his bath or something.
Yeah, I don't know. And the whole family was like up and dressed and ready to go.
Yeah. I don't know. If I have a job in a city, probably be up earlier than the kids going to school.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're all insomniac. But they're great singers, though.
Yes.
Nobody's ever sung Happy Birthday like that to me.
No.
Something I wished for after that movie. Well, you don't really do any research anymore. Craig, are you getting too old for this shit?
I don't think I'm too old for it. I'm still younger than Danny Glover was.
Oh, good.
In Lethal Weapon.
Yes. But here, I have some cleanup on that. I looked into that. So he's 50 in 1987, right? And he's in the Air Cavalry in the Yadrang Valley in 1965. For Mel buffs, that's We Were Soldiers. So he's in that unit. Interesting,
cool.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
He's in that unit. We don't know what he's in exactly, but his life was saved, etc. Now, if he's 50, that means he was born in 1937, which means he was like 29 or 30 in 1965. And the average age in Vietnam, as we all know by the song, is 19. So he was what? A professional soldier?
Yeah.
Why else would he still be in the army in 1965? So did he go to Korea when he was 19? Because Korea years could be, I don't know, peculiar. Because here's the problem that we have with Riggs is also a NAM veteran.
Yeah, there's that line where he says, I saw some guys like you in 69, and I'm doing the math in my head. So and everybody's talking about how he's a kid and stuff, and I'm like, this isn't working out.
So let's say he's 19 in 1969. So he's born in 1950, right? We'll discuss potentially where he was born later, because that's another story. Now, in 1987, he's about 36. So the age difference is 14 years. Where the hell does he get off talking old man shit to Murtaugh? They're 14 years apart.
Yeah.
He's an old fart too.
Yeah.
What is this?
Well, yeah. I mean, Riggs seemed more of the age to be, a Vietnam vet if you're looking at that birthday around 1950. And we also see that his wife was born in 53. So, yeah, I mean,
I think they made a major error because they just should have said, well, he was a vet from the later years, from the fall of Saigon or something, like in 1974 or 75. Because basically he has a really thick Australian accent. And you can say, well, that's because he's Australian. No, he's not Australian. He's an American. He was born in the United States. He lived there until he was 12. Then he moved to Australia. Now, okay, he picked up the accent. That's fine. But why would the character have an Australian accent? And to make it worse, in the TV show, which I don't know, is that canon? We don't know. But in the TV show, Riggs is a Texan and about a foot shorter. So, well, let's forget the TV show because it's been canceled anyway.
Yeah.
But my idea on Riggs with his Aussie accent is that Anzac, which is Australia, New Zealand, served in Vietnam, right? After the United States left, they didn't leave, but after the main army left, basically the Korean army, the British army, the Australian army, and the New Zealand troops took over positions of the United States filled with draftees. So technically, he could have been like an Australian military advisor, because that's basically what the Australians were doing. They were like training South Vietnamese military in basically recon techniques. So he was a kind of a LARP unit, and makes sense because he was a sniper. They don't really explain, but he's sort of a sniper because he can make this really difficult shot at 1,000 yards, yada, yada. He's Chris Kyle, basically.
Yeah.
Who actually did make those shots and killed a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
More than anyone else, apparently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that would be my explanation. But again, I'm pondering this way too hard to an extent Donner never planned on. Because I think Donner was kind of old school in the terms of, well, nobody's ever going to see this movie again. He really wasn't into the VHS thing. He didn't think he was making a movie that people would watch 50, 100 times. Because I've watched it 50 times at the very least.
Yeah. I think, again, it's one of those things where it's like, hey, you're watching a movie, deal with the accent.
Yeah, don't worry about it. It's just there.
Yeah. You mentioned Sniper, which wants me to sort of bring up one of the director's cut scenes, which I'm not sure if it was in the bunch of deleted scenes that you watched.
It's in the deleted scenes. I think I know what you're referring to.
It's really a bad sequence. It's Riggs gets called to the scene of a guy who's firing upon school children, and this is prior to meeting Murtaugh. So exactly. we sort of get like Murtaugh doing his thing and Riggs doing his things before they meet up in the director's cut.
Right.
And I don't know if this scene was sort of included to show how mentally unstable Riggs was, but he asks how good of a shot the sniper is, and they say, oh, he's not very good. So Riggs basically walks into open view of this sniper, lets him shoot at him, and then takes him out with his, 45 or his 357 or whatever.
Now he has a 9mm Beretta.
Okay, either way,
it actually shows that in the movie because they brag about their guns. That's old. That's old man versus young kid.
Yeah, like, Murtaugh uses the 6-shooter. Yeah,
he uses the 4-inch or whatever that. What is that? A 38 or something?
Yeah, it's a Beretta versus a sniper rifle though, and as ridiculous as this movie is, that scene was ridiculous because this guy, like, you see the shots land at like right at Riggs's feet. Like, this guy could have just took a beat on him and put him in the chest, and then we don't have a movie.
What was he shooting? Rubber bullets or something?
I have no idea. Again, I don't know if this was sort of to illustrate how mentally unstable Riggs was, or if he had, sort of suicidal tendencies, and he saw this as an opportunity. Like, hey, if this guy takes me out, he takes me out. But that's another thing they play with in the movie. And I've never actually sat down and read Shane Black's original script. I don't know how accessible it is. The Riggs character in general, he's dealing with the loss of his wife, and Murtaugh's debating whether or not he's crazy or not. And
but then you get to the nitty gritty, because that's really the hook that draws you into Lethal Weapon. It's not that he's this like superhero soldier turned policeman. It's because he's completely suicidal and mind-blowing suicide scene in it that he really that has no place in an action movie.
No, and I think that's what makes this movie. I own all the Lethal Weapon movies, so that's what sets this movie apart from the rest of the series. Is
exactly
the Riggs character is almost completely different in the sequels. It's still Mel Gibson, but the character itself is completely. It's a different guy. Yeah,
he's cheerful.
He must have been on Prozac or something.
Maybe. I mean, he was seeing. Well, maybe he stopped resisting the shrink.
Yeah.
That could be it. Here you have a guy turning a gun on himself. When have you ever seen it quite like that in a movie? I mean,
no.
From what I gather, even Mel Gibson wasn't on board doing it. It's in the director's commentary that Donner explains that, yes, we had that scene prepared and ready to go for whenever he was ready to do it. And at some point, Mel Gibson went to Donner and said, okay, I'll do it. And then it's like the last day of shooting, and then he just did it. And it's probably some of the best acting he's ever done. And Mel's a decent actor. He's won a lot of awards. It's something people sleep on, considered more of a great director than he's a great actor. But I mean, this was a classically trained actor, drama school in Sydney, and he did plays, and he's done Hamlet as a movie.
Yeah.
I mean, this is no slouch. So this was a scene he really got his teeth into.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely, as an actor, I'd imagine you really need to tap into something there that is probably hard to do because it's going to screw up the rest of your day. I'd imagine, you have to get somewhere mentally where you can sell it in your eyes. And I mean, it's a completely, as Jeff Hewlett used to say on the Slycast all the time, it's a great nonverbal performance.
Exactly.
And, it does end with that line where he talks about how much he misses his wife.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if you're putting together a list of the best Mel Gibson acting performances of all time, that's top 3 for sure.
Bone chilling.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So is he still suicidal at the end of the movie? There were a couple of things about that I just didn't understand, because thematically, he and Murtaugh, they go through the same story in the sense that Murtaugh is going through a midlife crisis and he's miserable and maybe he's questioning himself. Towards the end of the movie, he's twice the man and twice the cop he is compared to the start. And it's the same with Riggs. Riggs starts in basically on a drug bust going bad. The whole situation is kind of insane and basically a suicide by drug dealer.
Yeah.
Right?
Anthony Kiedis' father. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, amazing, isn't it? And there's no scene with his superior. So he ends up in a transfer and he ends up in homicide because they have a drug-related case and they just filter in a vice guy so they can pair this awful sergeant who hates everybody up with somebody at least.
Yeah. That's definitely one of the things the movie doesn't really,
just go with it.
Yeah. I'd say at the end of the movie, though, he's got a connection in his life that means something. And he's got people in his life that he cares about again. Mm-hmm. Murtaugh, and more importantly, Murtaugh's family.
Yeah, he gets adopted, doesn't he?
Like, you don't just turn off being suicidal, but I think it filled the void that was there when he's just sort of isolated and living by himself with his dog on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
That it sort of gave him that distraction he needed to keep his mind focused on living. One thing I did want to point out, I don't know if this was included in the deleted scenes, but there's a whole through line in the director's cut where he's picking up prostitutes, not to have sex with, but to come back to his house or his RV and watch the Three Stooges with.
Yes, that's the director's cut. That's definitely not in theatrical. Like I noticed, one of the deleted scenes I remember vividly is he shoots the TV.
Yes, and then he
buys a new one.
Yeah, but you can understand why that stuff was taken out, and you mentioned earlier that the theatrical cut is the superior cut of the film. But it's just weird, you can sort of you almost wonder how much more of that Shane Black sort of had in the script to sort of really define this complex character that was Riggs. But again, I think
I suspect that a lot of the plot holes are because they did a rewrite of the script. The guy who
Okay.
does all the other scripts, so they redid it, and I suspect they just glossed over the plot points and said, "Well, it'll work. We'll make it work."
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
this is basically a fairly low budget affair.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because one of the things I noticed about how they shot stuff was that I mean, a lot of the dialogue and the exposition takes place in cars. Did you
Mhm.
notice?
Yes.
They're
Yes.
just in
Yeah.
cars and they're
So
just
your
jacking,
coverage is limited. Yeah.
right? They're really driving. That's one of the things I noticed. They're really driving. This wasn't rigged or any. Normally
You're being
you have this
pulled
fake
or
car and
yeah.
but this was real. They were really driving, which is peculiar when you think about it. But it's also dirt cheap.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'd agree. And this is one of the, I think, funnest aspects of watching this movie is really seeing Donner's craft on display.
Yeah,
That dude knew what he was doing. He had
yeah.
a long history. He started out in TV in the 50s. This dude knew how to shoot.
He knew every
And
gimmick.
yeah. And again, I think that's I don't want to seem like I'm bagging on modern filmmaking because there's plenty of modern films that I enjoy. But again, this wasn't something that was put together in the editing room. This was a
Yeah.
guy who constructed his shots. He knew what he was doing, and it all fit together. And it's really
Mhm.
it's a fun movie to watch just visually. You can turn the sound off on this movie, and
Yes.
you're going to have it's going to keep your attention.
You'd miss the soundtrack, which is awesome. Sorry, Craig. It's just good. Yeah, this movie goes places. That's definitely true.
Yeah, no, and I mean not to overstate his importance, but this is a very different movie if Donner doesn't direct it.
Ironically, he directed all of them.
Yeah,
So the guy who hated action movies didn't hate Lethal Weapon.
yeah. I think it was probably the characters, Murder on Riggs, and anytime you're doing that quote unquote buddy stuff, I just imagine it's fun. I mean, I think as no matter what your job is, when you go to work, you want to have fun. So I imagine being on the set with Mel and Danny Glover and all the other folks that you get to work with. It was probably a fun set. And I mean,
Another interesting thing, isn't it?
mhm,
If you look at like the names and everything, Murtaugh sounds Irish to me.
yes,
So I suspect when they were casting, they weren't looking for Danny Glover.
no.
Danny Glover happened to them, I
Yeah. Well,
suspect.
yeah, and that gets into also the age discrepancies and things. It was
Yes.
they weren't casting based on what Shane Black put,
No,
male, white, 50s or whatever. Again, it was whoever worked for the role, and you know what? If the details didn't mesh, oh well, the chemistry's there.
it kind of sounds like that whole George Lucas kind of casting,
Yeah.
where he's more into the chemistry of actors than he is building a group. This movie is really carried by the chemistry between Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. So they must have cast it that way. Like
Oh,
whoever works with Mel, whatever works, that's what we do.
yeah, yeah. Again, that it's sort of like a holy trinity, if you will. Mel, Danny, and Donner. Those three are what make this movie what it is, and it's also what I mean, they've been talking about Lethal Weapon 5 for a long time, Seiko, and I was always skeptical because Richard Donner was in his 90s at that point, and unfortunately he's passed away. And I mean,
Mhm.
I can't imagine it's easy for a 90-year-old man to make a movie. They're very demanding days, especially filming an action movie. But now that Donner's gone, I know they've talked about sort of making it with,
Well, on the IMDb page, it says that Mel's directing.
yeah.
Who would
But
be
again,
the obvious choice, really.
yeah. But again, if you go with the math, now we're looking
They're
at,
too old.
yeah, well, Murtaugh's going to almost be 90 years old. He's really going to be too old for this shit at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah. How lethal are their weapons now?
Yeah, there's really a point, and unfortunately, we're in a time period where like nostalgia is hitting really hard,
Member
and it's
berries.
bringing back properties that people know and love. And if the math behind it doesn't work, oh well.
Well, they could
Um,
de-age.
They could. I mean, it worked in The Irishman, but is there really an audience for a Lethal Weapon 5?
Good question.
I mean,
Because
I don't.
you'd have to repackage it, and with current sensibilities, I don't think a movie like Lethal Weapon would work.
Yeah,
People would complain about it too much,
yeah. And again,
which is
how
a
do you-
shame because it's fun and it's
Yeah.
fun for good reason. And I'm not sure.
again, and you have to work in an 85-year-old Murtaugh. Like, what universe is he still involved in law enforcement? I mean, a 70-year-old Riggs. I mean, first of all, Riggs,
they would both be like really, 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 really retired.
Yeah, well, especially in law enforcement world. I mean,
it would be murder at the golf course.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe they were in a retirement home. But again, like for me, like you watch Riggs in that first Lethal Weapon, and you say, oh yeah, this is a guy that's not going to live to see 50.
That's the whole point of Lethal Weapon.
Yeah. And again, I've talked about
that's why when he's on a roof with a jumper,
yeah,
he cuffs himself to the jumper and just jumps.
And that's a cheap scene. That's the only scene that I give Donner a hard time for, because they don't give you any indication that there's a huge stuntman, inflatable there waiting for him. It's a cheat.
I still love that scene, and I forgive everything about it, because there's actually an extended part, and the extended part is just boring to watch, whereas the original is thrilling, and it's both funny and it's surprising, and it puts you on another level with the insanity of one Martin Riggs.
Yeah,
The next scene, I think, is the best scene between Danny Glover and Mel Gibson.
When they go into that store that's under construction, and
exactly.
Yeah, Murtaugh's
Murtaugh just tests him. He says, "You want to kill yourself?"
Yeah.
And he goes, "Yeah, put it under the chin," and then he actually pulls the trigger, and
he catches
Murtaugh just barely catches it, and the hammer hits his finger, and oof.
Yeah, no, that is a pretty amazing exchange between the two of them, and I love how unhinged Riggs is when he's up on the roof there with the jumper. But yeah, for me, it's like
he does these little things in that scene. He gives like these little looks where, especially where he telegraphs, when he gives him the cigarette, and he gives him that looks like, I got you now, and he's like he's cocking for it, and then he just goes into psycho mode.
That guy played the role really well too, because you could tell this was a guy that was doing something for the attention. He didn't have any intent of really jumping. It was more a cry for help.
He was just on the roof because he wanted his wife back, or he wanted his job back, or executive who got fired from a movie lot or something. He almost starts crying. That adds to the humor of the whole situation, that he's actually up there with a really suicidal person. And he realizes it the moment he gets cuffed to that guy, and he goes, "Do you want to jump?"
Yeah. And that's an interesting scene too, because if you boil it down, it's a really sort of scary scene, but there's a level of humor at the surface that there's some sinister stuff going on there. And then, like you said, it gets explored in the next scene with Danny Glover, but there's so much comedy at play there that it's a really weird balancing act there. It's, again, I think that's what makes this movie special is, nowadays we have a tendency to just go dark and stay dark. And here it's like you've got the moments of darkness, but it's balanced out by comedy. And I wouldn't call Lethal Weapon a dark movie by any stretch, but it's got some really dark moments.
It's got girls on drugs falling out of windows. It's as dark as it gets when you think about it.
Uh-huh.
What happens to that girl is that she just has the wrong dad.
Mm-hmm.
Probably lured her to certain parties to get on drugs. And
so they could use her.
She doesn't OD. She's poisoned.
Mm-hmm.
She's poisoned, so she jumps out the window because it's intentional, because it's to pressure daddy. Really, when you look at the character and you see the family photos and Sergeant Murtaugh looking at the porn video where they're showering together, and you're like, well, that doesn't sound too bad. It's just a girl scene. It's not like it's a Black's Raw or anything, or Brazzers. No, it's just looks fairly benign. So she was probably suckered into that whole thing.
Yeah, not to Riggs, by the way. When Murtaugh mentions that to Riggs says he calls it disgusting, I think, the girl on girl aspect of it.
Yeah. Interesting. Well,
so Riggs's conservative values there.
And here we go into Riggs, and this is where things get really interesting. Well, he's a dark guy. He's interesting in terms of quotability, because at some point he's on fire. Remember that scene where he's on fire?
This is a scene that definitely doesn't happen in 2021 or 2022.
Because basically he's on fire. His jacket is on fire. Sergeant Murtaugh, his partner, tries to pull that coat off of him. And his reaction is, "Hey, are you some kind of fag?"
Yeah, I mean that word was prevalent in the 80s, and it was
Definitely.
thrown around. Nobody considered it
It kind of
in the
had a different meaning.
absolutely. But it's funny if you watch that scene, Seiko. The only reason his jacket needed to catch on fire is so he could take it off, so the little kid could see the tattoo, the special forces tattoo,
because they needed that. Because how else were they going to get to the next part? Because I don't know if you understood anything about that investigation, but that's the most convoluted police procedural thing I've ever seen. They even talk about it that way. It's like, oh yeah, that's very thin. Oh yeah, that's anorexic. Yeah, it could work. It's just they're sort of guessing. This was the 80s, and you had Miami Vice on TV. And I don't know if you remember Miami Vice.
Oh, it's one of my favorite shows.
Yeah. Mine too. But it's Miami Vice. Those were bad, corrupt cops. They never solved any crimes ever, but they rode around in nice Ferraris, and they always had like really cool clothes on, and they had plenty of money to do stuff. This is a Southern police force, so we all know what they're like in the South. Really, if you look at Miami Vice, it's a bad cop show because the bad guy, what's his name, Calderon, they never actually caught him. He always got away. Yeah, there was a cop from New York coming all the way down to Miami to work with Sonny, who apparently had a deep cover. Yeah, he had a deep cover, all right.
And his name was Sonny in both instances.
Yeah. Awesome show. Such an awesome show. But what bad cops they were. And this was the height of Miami Vice, right? This is 1986, 1987, 1988. Everybody was watching Miami Vice. I'm not kidding. People don't understand this in this age of streaming where you just binge something. No, Miami Vice was on once a week at a specific time, and you were waiting all week to watch that show.
Yeah. Miami Vice is a complete great example of style over substance, and I'm completely fine with that.
Me too.
You were getting cool cars, cool fashion, cool music. Most importantly, probably. I mean, what the original pitch was, MTV Cops. I mean, that says it all.
Great synthesizer music.
Right? Oh my God, right? Jan Hammer. I own that complete. I think they put out like a 3 CD set. I want to say a couple of years.
I was going to bring that up. I suspect Jan Hammer influences.
Yeah. I mean, if you really want to get into my current stuff, it's Jan Hammer, it's Vangelis, who did the Blade Runner music and Chariots of Fire. But that's all there in the secret sauce, if you will.
So at some point he's tortured. I'm not really sure why they torture him when they tried to kill him before. Let's just forget about that. He's being tortured by the great Al Young. For everybody's listening, he's the guy in Die Hard who steals the chocolate bar.
Yeah.
Right? The guy with the mustache. He's in all my favorite movies, and I mean all of them. This guy tortures Martin Riggs, and it looks fairly nasty. I mean, we're talking Rambo stuff where he gets electrified and but before this happens, his main nemesis, called Joshua.
Oh, the great Gary Busey.
The great Gary Busey. Absolute
best character. Part. Yeah. I won't argue with you there. He's a machine. Now, he's a tool. He's a weapon in.
So here we are. Joshua just explains to him, well, we're going to torture you. And so who's the Slope? Now that makes sense because he's from Nam, and that's how you talk about people. Apparently, I watched a lot of Vietnam interview videos because there's like this online newspaper called Baltimore Gazette, who did a deep dive into Vietnam veterans, interviewing them, kind of in the way people were interviewed after, let's say, Schindler's List. They interviewed a ton of Holocaust survivors, and they did the same thing with E Company for Band of Brothers. Now, this was the same kind of thing where they would interview people about their Vietnam experiences, and they really puncture a lot of these myths we hold that pretty much Hollywood created, like how they would refer to the Vietnamese. They would talk about, Mr. Charlie Victor and stuff like that. I mean, they were deathly afraid of, especially the North Vietnamese. So there was a certain reference there. You're bound to be very superstitious, constantly being shot at when you can't see your enemy, when you're constantly under threat of death. You're not going to go there.
No, I was just
thought that way. They just didn't talk about stuff that way.
Yeah, I was just going to say that as well. Like, you're about to be tortured here and you're going to antagonize your torturer.
No.
Yeah.
Like, well, he's the hero.
Mm-hmm.
and he already knows he's going to save the day. I'm just going to quip cool stuff here. Quipping, who's the slope? Okay, great, Martin. Great. That's a really nice comment there. I hate it for it because he's making me sound like a sensitive millennial, which I'm not.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, most time when you're writing a character, you want you want the audience to know who the hero is and who the villain is, and there it just creates this mud in the water. Even in 1986, I'm sure that hit viewers a certain way. As a 14-year-old, that sort of just rolled off my back. I probably didn't even process it.
You heard it often enough. It was almost a trope.
Yeah, yeah.
You had all those Vietnam movies back then. Everybody was a dink and a slide and a zipper and a slope and all that stuff.
It didn't mean anything.
It didn't mean anything to you.
Yeah, yeah. But I again,
that's and this how you referred to as the enemy.
Yeah, and again, this gets back to if I was 30 years old watching Lethal Weapon for the first time, I'd be like, wait, this is the hero. This is the guy we're supposed to be rooting for.
Oh, what a nice guy.
Yeah. But again, this sequence is all about a 14-year-old viewer seeing this guy who's in a completely dire situation, using his body after he's been through this incredible electrocution torture, where Al even says he doesn't know anything if he, nobody can take that kind of punishment.
He was stung like a bird.
Yeah, he's still able to disable this guy with just his legs. For a 14-year-old, that's all you need. Total badass, action.
And it was expected because Jean-Claude Van Damme was coming up. Arnold, you had Stallone. We'd had a decade of Chuck Norris. We'd had Charles Bronson. They were doing stuff like that left and right. So it was almost expected.
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
So if skinny little Mel Gibson, I mean, he's very skinny in that movie. If skinny little Mel Gibson is going to be a hero, then he better take people out with his legs, right?
Yeah. Well, and again, there's a great quote unquote Hollywood moment in there where, Danny Glover and his daughter, some sinister shit's about to happen to his daughter. God knows what they were going to do to her.
They even leave it in a note. It's like, your daughter looks great naked. I'm like, we're in for it now.
Yeah. So the captain says, there is no heroes anymore, or whatever. And then on cue, the door opens up. Mel's got, Al on his back, and he drops him in and he takes out everybody in the room. I mean, that's the beat you need. And like I said, as a 14-year-old, that just hits you a certain way. I mean, it's ridiculous, it's absurd, and it's absolutely awesome.
Yeah, and it was during a time when you had the hero cop. They would do things that would get them fired pretty much in a normal situation, wreak havoc on a city and kill people left and right. Ridiculous, really. Yeah, that was a normal thing. That was something that in the 80s you'd just expect. It's like, we need explosions here, and we need a car flipping over 19 times here, and that's expected that they just walk out of that without a scratch. And so there's some of that in Lethal Weapon, although to a certain extent Lethal Weapon is very grounded in reality, in the sense that they do get shot, they do show pain when they're tortured, etc. So there's that. It's not a complete cartoon.
Yeah. It's funny. We on the last network show where myself, Doug, and Ryan sat down to talk a Sly movie, we talked Cobra. And we talk about what a bad cop Cobra is. He's setting guys on fire. I mean, like, your career's over there. You set a guy on fire.
He was the last resort, right? They'd never fire him. Who else could deal with the crazies?
Yeah, who's going to do the dirty work that nobody else wants to do?
Which is interesting because basically Murtaugh and Riggs turn into a death squad.
Yeah.
And there's no oversight here. It's not like there's a lieutenant saying, well, you can't do this or something.
For me, that almost makes me think that the higher ups were aware that there was some kind of clandestine operation going on here. Again, it's a MacGuffin, and I'm probably overthinking it. But
we're overthinking because then we'd have to get into Shadow Company, and that Shadow Company might have infiltrated the police department at higher levels, and that they're in on it. And then that arrest would never have been made. And you know what I mean?
Yeah. No. Yeah.
But plot holes and all, I've rewatched it a couple of times for the show. I had to research it now. I still enjoy it, and I enjoyed it even more now. It's crazy. Here's this ramshackle of a movie, but there's something about it that just makes it ultimately rewatchable. in a completely different way from, say, Die Hard, where Die Hard is one of the best plotted action movies ever done.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
I mean, it's brilliant. And the irony is that Lethal Weapon has sort of that same energy, and it's an absolute disaster in many ways, but somehow it works.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, if you want to make that connection to Die Hard works the way it does because of Bruce Willis.
True.
You put
nobody else could have done it.
Yeah, you put Al Pacino in Die Hard, which was one of the names that was thrown around. Ugh. It's not going to work. And again, that ties back to Lethal Weapon, where we talked about the casting. You know, Murtaugh and Riggs here are really important. And if you drop in any other of, you know, Gibson's contemporaries at the time.
What if Stallone had done this?
Would have been a very different movie, I'll tell you that.
It would have been a kind of Tango and Cash kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's part of the charm of Lethal Weapon is the script that Shane Black had provided. And
true.
Again, you know, and you talked about it, you know, there's plot holes that, you know, are big enough that you can fly a jet through. But at the end of the day, all the absurdity works. And
it works because of Mel and Danny.
Yeah. So that's all stuff that's forgivable. Yeah. If the chemistry is there,
because you've got Mel and Danny. It's so strong. It carries on for 3 other movies.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
When you think about it, it's in many ways, this is the ultimate buddy cop movie. What is supposed to be good about a buddy cop movie, they get absolutely right with this one.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, like 48 Hours as an example. And that's not really a buddy cop movie, but it's a buddy movie where they're so diametrically opposed.
Yes,
the Eddie Murphy
much more
character.
adversarial.
Yeah. Whereas here, it's there, but it's not overtly stated. You can see
they're both
that
cops.
Whereas
but they have 48 hours, Eddie Murphy's a criminal.
Yeah.
Who's let out of jail for 48 hours, hence the notion.
But they have different approaches here. And you can see that Murtaugh and Riggs shouldn't get along, and they don't always get along. But like I said, it's not overtly telegraphed. It's handled in a good way. Like I said,
Donner handled it right. So this is an interesting juxtaposition.
Yes.
If Donner had directed 48 Hours, that would have been a dramatically different movie, probably with much better chemistry, or different chemistry, I should say.
Yeah.
With Eddie Murphy and his counterpart. Whereas if Walter Hill had directed Lethal Weapon, we wouldn't be talking about it right now. Match. It would have been a lot angrier.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And again, that sort of illustrates what a director brings to a project. And I don't want to say it doesn't matter as much. If you look at like your typical Marvel movie, all the major action beats in a Marvel movie, before the director's even hired, those are all created in a computer.
That's movie by committee.
They know exactly what those action scenes are. And then the director comes in to direct the talking head scenes.
It's not directing, is it?
We could definitely probably devote a whole episode to discussing that, Zico.
Millennials would hate us for it. Because they just call us boomers and say, well, all you're saying is everything used to be better. Well, guess what?
In this case, it was.
Now, the big question on everybody's minds, is Lethal Weapon the greatest Christmas movie ever made? I'm still hung up on, is it Die Hard? Is it Lethal Weapon? Or is it something else? But it's a very powerful Christmas movie.
I got to say that Lethal Weapon hits the themes of a Christmas movie a lot harder. Of course, it opens with Christmas music. It closes with Christmas music. Yes. But also the whole element of Riggs being adopted by the Murtaugh family has a Christmas themed. Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't something I really thought about too much until I sat down to watch it for this podcast. And you can make a really, really strong argument that if you set this in the summer instead,
you wouldn't have known the difference because it's California. Yeah. And according to rumor, it's always sunny in California.
Yeah. Well, although it does rain in Lethal Weapon, which is kind of interesting. But no, I think...
And that's a thematic rain, isn't it? At his wife's grave.
Yeah.
That's where it's raining because he's crying.
Yeah, yeah.
He's in sorrow, and rain represents his sorrow and maybe some kind of closure.
Yeah. And then for the street scenes, pavement just looks cooler when it's wet.
Very true. They really beat us over the head with it. The only thing it doesn't have that Die Hard has is a dead Santa Claus.
Checking the boxes. Yeah, that's a big miss. Yeah, yeah.
But then again, Die Hard was still in the future, so I'm going to have to give it to John McTiernan for that.
Yeah.
Okay, Craig. Thank you so much for being on my podcast. It's been such an honor to have someone of your stature on my novice little podcast like this. I mean, just look at the things you've done. It's incredible.
Well, you're very welcome. First of all, it was a privilege to come on and talk with you. I know you've put a lot of work into putting this podcast together, and I know you've already got a couple of episodes in the can that are going to be, I believe, debuting as of this recording in like the next 2 weeks or something on
the excitement is building.
The network. So yeah, just growing day by day, and I know your show is going to be a great addition, and it was true honor for me to be invited on, because I always enjoy doing as little work as possible and letting somebody else steer their ship, where I just answer questions. So this was a lot of fun. I was able to just, wake up, walk the dogs, brew my coffee, and come up and talk Lethal Weapon with you.
Yes, well, that's how I sold it to Ryan. It's like, look, I'm gonna, whatever happens, it'll be good, because I'm gonna have Craig on, and I'll do all the research and I'll do all the editing, and all we have to do is just let Craig do his thing, because we all know the guy should really be in radio.
Oh my goodness. You're too kind, Tico. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate the value you think I bring to podcasting.
Well, it goes without saying. And okay. We'll see you again for next season when we cover Machete with Mel Gibson.
I can't wait. That is another, Robert Rodriguez is a true 80s inspired filmmaker. Yeah, that's going to be a blast talking about that movie.